Trust in physicians, hospitals, and the overall medical system has gone down way low. There's a recent article, Journal of the American Medical Association, so pretty official journal. In 2020, 7 out of 10 Americans trusted a doctor in their healthcare system. Today, that's closer to 4 out of 10 people. So a huge drop, almost 50% drop there. And also, I saw a recent poll on social media, so take it with a grain of salt, but 32,000 people responded. So a pretty big sample size, and the question was, do you trust your doctor? And 95% said no, which is a staggering statistic. Because it used to be, you're a doctor, oh wow, you're so trustworthy, you get pulled over for a ticket, you're like, I'm a doctor, and they're like, oh, okay, you can go. Not anymore. And even talking to some of my colleagues that are physicians, they're like, I don't trust the people I'm working with. I don't even know how to trust myself. So, and I'll just aside, there's a couple of reasons why that's the case. And I know that there are a lot of people that are political or emotional about a lot of these things, and we don't want to go into that because our goal is really, let's figure out how to address these issues. And one of the biggest erosions of trust is doctors are no longer, most doctors that I know are in a position where they can't be innovative anymore. So when I was going through my medical training, we had a professor that said, hey, 10 years into practice, 90% of what you're taught is going to change in one way or another. Right? It used to be 200, I keep on going back to the example, 200 years ago, probably botching up some of these dates, but an OB-GYN doctor got put in jail into a mental asylum because he said, hey, we got to wash our hands between deliveries or otherwise people are getting infections. And they put him in a mental asylum. He later died in that mental asylum. And that's just to show that, and nowadays it's like, you don't wash your hands between things. I mean, that's going to be a big issue. So what's happening in medicine is that medicine is becoming so restrictive for a lot of doctors and other providers that people aren't willing to be innovative, and there's a big loss of trust because patients are willing to be innovative nowadays. I was talking to a friend of mine who was a doctor. He had these gut issues, and he went to other physicians, specialists, and they said, hey, you got to be put on these medications, potentially, for IBS, and he was taking all these anti-inflammatory medications, anti-immune medications, immunosuppressants, and he would get sick all the time, he'd gain lots of weight, and with steroids and so forth. And he was just like, I'm sick of this. I'm going to go out there and find something myself. And he went and he saw a couple courses on modifying your diet, changing your lifestyle, some supplements and so forth. And I looked at him, I'm like, man, you look great. And he goes, yeah, IBS gone. I cut out a lot of these things that were causing inflammation in my body. And now I'm careful about what I eat. I eat really clean and I don't need any medication. I dropped 30 pounds. I feel great. I have a lot more energy. And I wish more people knew about this. And patients are waking up to this. More patients are looking for alternative ways of treating their chronic conditions than just taking a medication. And a lot of doctors are still of the mindset that we got to do it by the book. I remember when I was training, there's a database called Up to Date, where that went through all the most recent evidence-based ways of treating something, which is great. It was a great reference for when you needed it. But also nowadays, it's like you got to do things by the book. If you don't do things by the book, a lot of these doctors out there, they're just trying not to get sued, because nowadays it's so easy to lose your medical license. Sometimes things are outside of your control. And one of my good friends of mine, he's in his 60s. He doesn't need to practice, but he practices because he likes to. And he had a patient come in, and it was a really sad situation. She was going to multiple doctors looking to get drugs, and he ended up believing the fact that she was in a lot of pain and gave her actually a low-dose painkiller. And usually that wouldn't have been an issue if she didn't combine it with 3 other painkillers. And she ended up dying. And she was a prominent attorney. So it was it was a really sad situation. And what happened was he had to go to the medical board, and it was a tough situation. So in this case, he was fine. He could afford the lawyer. He could do all this stuff, and it was a really sad case with the patient. And he was saying, look, I don't know what it was like. I don't know what it's like to start out anymore. Because imagine if you've got $500,000 in medical debt, you might be making $200,000 as a primary care physician. Something like this happens to you. You can lose your ability to work. You just spent the last 7 years of your life training, and then that can all go out the window really quickly. So that's what's facing a lot of doctors out there, and that's why they say, hey, we've got to do everything by the book. We can't innovate. A patient comes in and says, I want to try this thing that's outside of the parameters of what up to date says. Then you can say, look, you got to do it by the book. And that's why a lot of patients are not getting the results that they're looking for, because a lot of these traditional therapies, the modern therapies, granted, medicine can handle emergencies really well, but for chronic conditions, we're not there. People are on maintenance medications. People a lot of times aren't addressing the root cause of the conditions. And just like my friend who's a physician, a very good one, with a gut issue, a lot of people are finding out that there are other ways to do things. It's not a $10,000 a month prescription subscription. And because of that, there's not a lot of money behind it from marketing and validation and so forth, but people are desperate enough where they're looking for alternative means. And that's why trust is being eroded in the medical system, because if the medical system is not willing to innovate as much and look at these alternative means, myself personally, I had a situation where in college I developed a skin condition. It was almost like psoriasis, and went to 3 different dermatologists. A lot of people couldn't figure it out. Ultimately, one of my good friend of mine, he's one of the top dermatologists in the Northeast, and he said, hey, I think you might have a nickel allergy. So we tested it. I had a nickel allergy. I was allergic to my cell phone. We published a paper, but that wasn't the whole story. I was getting more and more allergic and sensitive to other things, and it got to a point where it was so bad that 70% of my body looked like a burn victim. I was embarrassed to go out. I was getting infections all the time. I was on steroids. I gained 40 pounds. I was upset all the time, and because the hormone changes when you take prednisone and so forth. And it was just not a good way of living. And I said, there's got to be a better way. So I went out and ended up doing about 3 years of lifestyle modification, herbal medicine, Eastern medicine. And today I'm 100% cured. I can touch nickel. I'm not allergic anymore. And to this day, even though my dermatologist saw my journey, he still doesn't believe it. And he goes, it's great that you're not on any steroids or topical creams, but I don't believe that you're cured. And we have these discussions, and that just to show that a lot of times, a lot of providers aren't willing to be flexible and really listen to what the patients are looking for, and also look at alternative ways. And the doctors who they're leaving the system because they're realizing that they can't actually improve the quality of life for patients the way that they want to within the system. And that's why you have this huge erosion of trust. And then on top of that, you add in the coercion of, hey, nowadays I see all the time where medical mistakes is one of the leading causes of death in the United States after cancer and heart disease. And what happens there is a lot of times we see, hey, if you don't go to the doctors for everything, something happens, it's on you. But if you go to the doctors and maybe there's a mistake, maybe it's gray zone, it's, we tried everything we could, at least you tried. So there's that social stigma that I think a lot of people are, including physicians, are starting to resent. And because of that, you have this erosion in trust. And once trust is eroded, it's very, very hard to get back. I was talking to somebody else who he started a lock company. It was a smart lock company, a really smart guy. And he said, Johnny, it's when we try to get into Home Depot, try to get into Lowe's, there are 3 lock manufacturers in the world that dominate the entire market. And they sort of have this oligopoly. And it's not just the way that they set it up, but it's also because they've built that trust. right? The lock in your front door, you got to make sure it works. So these companies are really conservative. They don't do any. Luckily, in the lock business, right? It's like either door locks or it doesn't. It's strong enough or it's not. Medicine, there's a lot of variables. So not saying medicine's a lock company, but what happens is for new players, it's nearly impossible for them to get into the market without working with these guys because the consumer doesn't have that trust with a new company. It's like, are you going to trust your front door with a company that, may have a security breach, may have this or the other thing? So these companies understand, and these companies have been around for 50, 100 years. They understand that once you have that trust cannot be bought. And that's why the medical system was the gatekeeper for all these therapies previously, because they had that trust. They were like the lock companies. But once that trust is eroded, you can't buy it back. It's really, really, really difficult to buy it back. If you want to buy it back, you have to really change the way that you practice, and it takes a long time. So I think we're in a very dangerous situation where the cost of healthcare is skyrocketing. The cost of trust in a low trust environment, it costs even more to do business. Trust is being eroded. Doctors are leaving the system. And it's because a lot of people that are in the system are not taking the time to listen to what do patients really want. Patients are really looking for cures for their chronic conditions. They're looking for high quality of life. They're not looking to be 90 years old in a nursing home on a feeding tube. Most of my peers, they say, hey, look, if I need those advanced interventions, I'm not doing them. Most doctors would not want to live that way. And the public is catching up, and they're realizing that the quality of life is more important than trusting authority.